this is that Friday. It's the very first one, so there's probably going to be hiccups or whatever. This overlay will probably change to and all that sort of stuff, but this is what we got for now. This is actually led by Vance at Standing Off Game Dev up in the left corner. We have our guest, and of course, welcome back anytime, assuming he's not some psychopath. We're just going to call him Trolls because no one can pronounce his name. And that's I'm usually pretty good with pronouncing names, so when you pulled out that Bushman sound, whatever that was, I'm impressed.
Sounds a little Klingon, doesn't it?
Yeah, you got so there's
Throat.
if you don't know him, he goes by Space Quest Historian on Twitter and YouTube and various channels such as that.
Twitch,
all right,
too.
so I will be muting myself. I hope you all enjoy. I don't know, did the guy who made Snail Trek, did he give you any specific instructions with those extra keys, or giving them back, or?
No, I told him that if we didn't give them out, we'd just not use them, and I'll let him know that we haven't. That's fine.
Okay, cool.
If anybody here who hears this would like to join the voice section, let us know.
You'll have to friend one of us and add it in, yes, on Discord.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, without further ado, I'll hand it off to Vance, Indie Fireside.
All right. So today we're talking about Snail Trek. It is an indie game which hails back, not hails, I guess that means comes from. It is inspired by, the old adventure games from the 80s, the early adventure games before point and click, in which you typed in commands, except that it improves on that formula in quite a few ways, one being, of course, text prediction. So it's probably the only game that I know of right now that is doing graphical text input. I mean, besides Phil's other games, I don't know of anybody else that's doing that. Anybody else know anybody that's doing that?
I played a game recently that's coming out on my channel soon called Trackless, which was a first-person WASD movement kind of thing. But when you ran up against an object and you clicked on it, it would then ask you to type in a verb. Sort of similar to, the way that the Leisure Suit Larry 7 interface worked, where you clicked on something and it would ask you to type in, well, what do you want to do with this object? And the strange thing about this game is also that it awarded you points based on how inventive you were with your verbs. So yes, you could say wash, that would give you 4 points, but if you said rinse, it would give you 6 points. And stuff like that. Very interesting game. Should be coming out next Friday on my channel. Also an indie game. Very weird. But that is probably the only modern game that readily springs to mind that is using a parser system, and it is certainly not a throwback to the old Sierra days, as Phil's games certainly are. Also, a challenge is backed up.
Yeah, I hear that as well. What is that?
Sounds like a phone going off.
Except it keeps going. What is that?
It's the aliens. They've come to take you away.
Oh, apparently somebody is doing construction in the next apartment next door to me. So that's going to be awesome for the stream.
Yay. Great timing, too.
Yes. Apparently they just decided to do it right now.
Thank you, Vance's neighbors.
Yes. So, let's see. What was I going to say? Okay, so...
Tika just
Stories
said in the
Untold.
chat, Stories Untold. How could I forget?
Yeah.
Anyway, I haven't actually played that. I really should.
I haven't either.
Yeah, just haven't had the time. My backlog is huge.
Oh, don't even get me started. It's enormous. What was I gonna say? Yeah. So what I was going to say? Which I won't say because I
You
will
were
say it when
rudely interrupted.
because I will say it a little bit later. I actually would like to turn it over to other people. This is a discussion. Anybody's welcome to join in, by the way. The person who has joined in on the voice right now is Trolls, otherwise known as Space Quest Historian. But anybody is welcome to join in on the voice chat or the text chat. And so, in that spirit, I'm going to turn it over to the other people, whether you are typing in chat or whether you are trolls, to say what it is that you liked about Snail Trek. This is a purely positive things. What is it that you think was what this game did very, very well? And I will turn it over to others, and I will be the last one to speak on this. So I guess I'll turn it over to you then.
Well, for my money, the thing that made me fall in love with Snail Trek, and indeed also the Adventure Jam game that Phil Fortier did, which was Void Quest,
Mm-hmm.
was that he took what made the parser games of Sierra Online, specifically in the late 80s and early 90s, what made them fun, and just cut away all the tedious shit. And the tedious shit being, of course, your constant battle with the parser to figure out, well, what the fuck does this thing actually want me to type in? Phil has incorporated well, a technology made popular, I guess, by smartphones and shit, where he's actually got predictive text in it and autocomplete. When you type in something, it'll actually suggest words that it can understand in a little small font under the parser. So what I like to, stroke his ego by saying is that he actually made parser games fun. He, because the one thing that I sort of dislike about point and click adventure games, if we have to get into that. I know you said just positive things, and I'm going to stay positive on Snail Trek. What point and click adventure games did in the early 90s was that they took away the absolute freedom that you had with a parser game. Like, you could click the hand icon on something, and the game would assume that you either wanted to pick it up, or move it, or kick it, or whatever. But what happened if you wanted to fondle it, or lick it, or gently caress it, or take it to town, or something like that? The parser let you go in there and type in anything to your heart's content, and it was really up to just the foresight of the writer, the programmer, to make sure that all of those responses were met. And I really enjoyed that Phil just upfront puts it in your face. This is what the game understands, so you won't be running into that constant wall of, I do not understand that, please try something else. Thought that was a massively ingenious improvement onto something that I've dearly missed in adventure games, and that is that absolute freedom of being able to, at least in theory, try anything you want. That is my number one favorite thing about Snail Trek. Also, snails are cool.
Yes, I completely agree with you. In fact, what you just said was what I was going to say. So that's
Bugger.
kind of why I kind of turned it over to other people to say it. I grew up on text adventures. There's no graphics whatsoever, and you just you typed in what you wanted to do, and then you read the result. And text adventures live and die on the responses that they give, right? If you're writing a text adventure, you have to respond to anything that the user wants to do. In fact, one of my favorite text adventures was a murder mystery in which it advertised on the back of the box when I bought it that that you had complete freedom to try anything that you wanted, and it understood a large number of things that there was no reasonable excuse to try. Um, And that's something that is definitely missing in point and click adventures, is just that idea of just trying something that you think might work, instead of just click this on this. And there were two responses to that too. There was the Sierra response. The initial Sierra response was a couple different things that you could do. You had a couple different options that you could choose from, and then click on anything. And then of course there was the LucasArts response, which was the verb system, where LucasArts was trying more to capture the freedom, I think, of the original text parser, while Sierra was just kind of abandoning the whole text parser thing altogether. It's a matter of taste who succeeded more. I would say that the verb system was not as enjoyable to me personally, because it just seemed to be arbitrary when there was only a set number of things that you could, a set number of verbs, rather than just being able to type in anything. And I would say on Snail Trek captures what was good about the text parser interface, because when I walked into a room and I said eat vomit, it gave me a unique response for trying to eat the vomit. Right? I mean, it understood what I wanted to do, and it gave me a response for it.
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly nothing like that would happen in a point and click interface, because there would be no eat icon, right?
Well, there are what you said about the point and click adventures being a shoot off from the a parser interface. With the first point and click adventure ever made, Maniac Mansion, they had
Yep.
a ton of verbs. About half of them were useful. And they started
Exactly. Yep.
just paring them down until they arrived at the classic 9-verb interface that we know
Mm-hmm.
from Day of the Tentacle and Fate of Atlantis and such. Meanwhile, Sierra went in the opposite direction. They started by paring it down to just walk, look, talk, and then an ubiquitous use icon. That
Right.
was just a hand. It's just anything you can do with your hand.
Or in some Space Quest versions, lick, right?
Yeah, you had the nose and the tongue
Yeah,
icon.
right.
They weren't used to solve puzzles. They were just there to give Josh Mandel something to do. And then gradually Sierra started going, well, I'm looking at Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Fathers. They went, all right, well, actually, that's a bit limiting, because now the icons are assuming too much. If you're trying to pick something up and then the character says, I can't push that, and you're going, well, fuck you, that's not what I was trying to do. So with Sins of the Fathers, they went completely overboard and gave you a million icons for open, push, move, fondle, lick, whatever.
Yeah.
And eventually they just said, fuck it, let's just have a single cursor and be done with it. We'll make Phantasmagoria, and it's going to be shit, and everyone's going to love it. So that's what... And for my money, the best interface ever is one that combines the ease of using the mouse with the freedom that a text parser offers.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, Snail Trek does not have mouse... you can click around the screen to make the snails move, but everything else is done with the parser. It's a classic throwback. It even has CRT scan lines. I love that to bits.
Which is awesome, yeah.
Which is awesome.
Really awesome.
I will put this out there. My favorite adventure game UI of all time is Leisure Suit Larry 7. Now, say what you will about the Leisure Suit Larry series, but the interface in Leisure Suit 7...
I love the Leisure Suit Larry series. I'm not one of those Leisure Suit Larry haters. I think that 3 was a little bit ridiculous in some ways, but and the later ones were ridiculous in different ways. But yeah, I definitely am a big fan of the Laser Suit Larry series.
I've played all of them, and you know they haven't aged particularly well, but I do enjoy some of the things that at least they did from technological standpoint. The thing about the interface in Leisure Suit Larry 7 that I really enjoyed was that it was the perfect marriage between a point and click interface and a parser interface, because you could click on something and it would open up like when you right click in Windows, it would go, okay, do you want to look at this? Do you want to talk to it? Do you want to pick it up? It had all this context sensitive shit. And then at the bottom, it just said, well, just enter your own verb and we'll see what happens. Granted, it didn't understand a hell of a lot of verbs, but it was a step in the right. And if they'd gone with that and just refined that thing and made it even, you know, bigger and better in subsequent games, that would have been my favorite interface of all time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we have some people saying things. So Tikenja, I don't actually know how to pronounce your name. Sorry about that.
I just call him Tika.
Yeah. He says, I love that Snail Trek lets you change which character you control to spice up the puzzles and make it less egocentric. The game doesn't force you to identify as one specific character, and further destroys that in Chapter 3 to great effect. Yeah, except in Chapter 1, of course. In Chapter 1, you are one character. But in Chapters 2 and 3, you can switch characters. And, yeah, I think that's...
Not in 3. You can switch characters in the second one.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
you control all the 3 snails. But in 3, it changes shit up on you, and suddenly... I don't know how much we want to spoil the series, necessarily.
Yeah. Well, I think that the idea of this talk is that everyone would have played it.
All right.
That's kind of the idea. That's kind of the idea of the discussion. Is we assume anybody watching and discussing has played the series. Oh. So I think spoilers are fair game here.
All right, cool. So we can say without spoiling it for anyone that in the third game, instead of playing as the snails, the heroes of Snail Trek, in the third game you actually play as the antagonists, who are out to kill the snails. So now you're suddenly playing as the bad guys, which
though I found incredibly interesting, because when you start reading the entries in the computer, it kind of turns it around on you, is that maybe I don't know how it's going to turn out in Star Trek 4, but maybe the snails are the bad guys. Mm-hmm. Maybe the snails, because you know how snails are in real life, they're pests.
They're vicious little bastards.
Yeah, they come in and they do exactly what that computer said that they do. They come in and they just destroy everything and leave. And it, that computer said that they destroyed everything on their home planet. They continually seek out new planets and destroy them, and this is what we're trying to stop. And so now I'm wondering, actually that is what snails do. Are the snails actually not that good? Are the snails worth stopping? Maybe they should be stopped.
Well, there's an interesting thing there, which is in any good fiction, if you're writing a villain or an antagonist, a villain never assumes that they are the villain. Any villain thinks that they're actually doing the good thing. Unless you're writing a really cartoony sort of character, any person who's cast as the villain has to have some sort of motivation that makes sense to them. Yeah. Not just because I'm so evil, but because there's actually something in it. And so you could argue that the snails are in fact the evil, and you didn't learn that until the third chapter, because they just go from planet to planet, eat up all the lettuce, and just basically race the thing to hell and then move on to the next. Or you could argue that the Zarks are evil, because while they are basically trying to stop the snail scourge, they also have a slightly less noble intention or motivation behind it, which is that snails are very delicious.
But I think Snail Trek did a particularly good job of, when it made that switch to you playing the bad guy, when it made that switch, it did it really, really well, especially through that computer entry. That computer entry, at first I was like, I'm the bad guy. Why should I even try? Because I'm the bad guy. But then it really makes you realize, okay, actually, maybe I should be doing this. Maybe because of this, that's happening, maybe I should be doing this. So it made me want to do this. I think that this is different than I don't know. Have you played the game Resonance?
I haven't. No.
No, it's a game, Wajidai game, but not designed by Dave Gilbert. It was designed by I don't remember his name, but published by Wajidai Games.
Yeah, I've seen it. I just haven't
Yeah.
played it.
And I don't want to spoil that game, so I'm not going to say very much more, except for the fact that you play the bad guy at some point, and in that game you don't really know why you played the bad guy. It's like, why was I doing that? Why did I do that? I was the bad guy. Why did I do that? I mean, it was. But in Snail Trek, when he turned it around to when you were the bad guy, you actually had a good reason to be doing what you're doing. You actually had good justifications.
Yeah, also because you've been playing 2 games up until this point, and you've gotten to learn the snails, and their captain was murdered,
Yeah.
and one of them turns out to be an imposter, and it seems like, oh my god, the poor little snails, whatever are they going to do? So when you get cast as the quote-unquote villain in the 3rd game, you just go, well, I don't want to kill the poor little snails. They're so nice, and oh, wait a minute. You suddenly get some motivation as to why you want to be doing this. I've played other games where you also get cast as a villain. I'm playing a game called Bear With Me.
Oh yeah, I love that game. I love that game. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's great. I'm playing that on my stream thing on Wednesdays, and every once in a while, because the characters are running around being scared of this spooky character called the Red Man, and every once in a while he appears on screen, and you actually control him, and you get to go up to other NPCs and murder them in cold blood, or torch down diners and shit. And it's an interesting switch. Instead of this just happening in a cutscene, you are actively directing this evil person to do evil things. But there's that lack of motivation as to why would I want to be doing this? I feel kind of dirty for doing this.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
Yep. Ron Gilbert-esque. That's a good phrase.
So for such a small game series, the amount of detail he put into extras is amazing. The options for the UI, the item descriptions, and the simulated computer encyclopedia. Yeah, the simulated computer encyclopedia reminds me very much of the early adventure games. You would always have, you would often have in early adventure games, a way to research things and read more about what was going on. And so, yeah, that was something that I loved too, because I loved flipping through in Space Quest. There was one, it was Space Quest 3? The Time Rippers. Which was it?
That's number 4.
4, yeah. In Space Quest 4, there was the catalog where you could just read about every single description of every device, that kind of thing. There used to be so much to read and discover in adventure games, and there isn't as much anymore.
I think you're thinking of number 6, which has a character data or a creature database on the show.
No, I'm talking about when you go into the store in the mall in the Time Rippers.
Which store is that?
You have to buy one thing in the store. It's like Radio Shack. It's a Radio Shack ripoff.
Yeah. There are a couple of bargain bin game.
Yeah, exactly.
Shops.
What Tikan said, where you buy the plug adapter.
Oh, that thing. Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has
So
all
there,
these fake
yeah,
products that you can't buy. Oh, yeah. No,
right, exactly. And that's the kind of and but you're also right about the creature database in what was it,
that
five?
was 6.
Six. Yeah, you're also right about that too. As there used to be things to discover in adventure games that you weren't really even relevant, but it was just fun to explore and discover.
Hmm.
And Snail Trek certainly captures that with the encyclopedia. There's one relevant entry that I've found so far, right? The one that is the people that capture you.
Hmm.
But other than that, there's no reason for me to know about any of the other races except that it's interesting,
It's
right?
flavor, it's world building, and
Yeah.
I completely agree. There's a tendency in modern adventure games that the only things that are relevant to the plot are the only things that we're going to focus on. So if it's not directly relevant to the plot,
Yep.
then screw you. You're on a rail, and we just want you to get from
Yep.
point A to point B,
Yep.
and off you fuck. And oftentimes you walk into a room and you can, you know, there are only two hotspots because there are only two hotspots you're meant to interact with. Whereas in, old Sierra games and old LucasArts games certainly too, you could click on anything in the scene and it would generate a response,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of whether you needed to mess with it or not. And the Space Quest series is quite famous for being very verbose.
Mm-hmm.
When you just click the look icon on something, it would launch into this lengthy description of, the sun's usually sets at this hour, but, on Saturdays it sets at this hour because some idiot opened a wormhole. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that's almost Hitchhiker Guide-esque.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
I didn't need to know that, but that was fun.
Yeah, and Chikan says too many modern adventure games direct like you would direct a movie, right?
Yeah.
Rather than being a space to explore, they only give you the things that are relevant, and then you can't do anything else, right?
Life is strange before the storm. I'm looking at you, buddy. I mean,
So
that thing
yeah.
is so much on rails, it's unbelievable. It's
Hmm.
so much on rails, it should be a subway car.
Yep. Yep.
Another thing I really appreciated about Snail Trek is we were talking about extraneous information and being able to try different things. One thing that I think Phil also did very well was that it understands sentence construction very well. And this is a tricky thing, and it's one of those mechanical things that you don't notice until it's not working.
Hmm.
Some of the very old text adventures, like on the Commodore 64, or even early text adventures, games that weren't made by Infocom, basically, they would have these very simple verb noun constructions. Instead of typing "pick up the lamp," you just type "get lamp." And
Yeah.
just
Right. Right.
be done with it. And Phil actually has anticipated a lot of these things. His parser, while not the most intelligent on the planet, I mean, that one has to go to Infocom's Z thing.
That
But
that one goes to the game that I was describing before. I swear to God, this game, this was a mystery game that was set in a bar, and there was like almost literally no other place that you could go except this bar. But you could talk to anyone, and you could talk to them about anything, and you could do anything. So basically, it was a very, very limited text adventure setting
hmm,
with no graphics, and you could just do anything. I mean, that was dumbfounding to me when I was a kid in the 80s. I was like, wow, I can do anything, right? So, I mean, that that kind of environment is something that you would aspire to, but you can only do it in that particular type of environment where you are a murder mystery, you're all trapped in one place. There's only a certain number of things you can interact with. And so, yeah.
oh yeah. Oh, well, Snail Trek is a linear experience. It wants you to get from point A to point B, but it will recognize. I mean, at one point, I think in the first game, yeah, when you open up that little hole that goes down into the duct or whatever, you have to go and hit the gravity switch. Um, I was sort of fiddling around with, okay, do I climb in hole? And it goes, well, you can't actually climb up a hole. I said, okay, that's not what I meant. And I just typed in, just out of frustration, just typed in, get in the fucking hole. And he
That's what she
did.
said.
Well, yeah. Stop spying on my private messages, please. But yeah, he actually did that. So he's anticipated a lot of not just basic syntax. You must understand basic syntax, but he also anticipated a lot of frustration that people and his parser is good at filtering out. Like if you type in "get in the fucking hole, you dumb shit," it's gonna just recognize "get in hole."
Uh-huh.
And that's
Mhm.
pretty. That's nice of him to do.
One thing I noticed, this was purely on accident, by the way. I did not plan to do this. I promise you, a complete typo. Is when in 3, I wanted to insert the disc. I typed insert dick, and it understood my typo. It inserted the disc. It didn't give me a witty message, which I was disappointed with, but it did understand that typo and did what I wanted it to do.
Well, it might have actually auto-corrected because without not just having autocomplete, it also autocorrects. Because I found myself making some typos when I was playing it as well, and it does actually very subtly autocorrects
Okay.
spelling mistakes and such.
Yeah.
Which is and the good thing is also Phil put in for the purists. He's made it so it's not mandatory. You can turn these things off, and you can also turn off the CRT scan lines. You can even, for purists, you can even enable it so that it's Sierra style movement. Instead of you holding down the arrow keys to move the snails around, it instead becomes the old Sierra style where you
Right. You
hit the
press it
key
and then you
once.
press it again in order
Yeah,
to stop. Yeah.
exactly. Yep.
Yeah,
So,
which was annoying, by the way. And I realized that Sierra were the pioneers, and so they didn't know any better. But I think that was a very annoying style of movement.
well, it's fun to watch people who have never played an AGI game. Sitting down for the first. This happened when we were putting together Stair Quest for last year's Adventure Jam.
Yeah,
It
which
was
I played, and it was exactly the right amount of frustrating. Yeah, good job.
some people would yeah, but it was fun watching Let's Plays of it because we went to great pains to frustrate the hell out of players, and one of the things we insisted upon was that it also have standard Sierra style movement, and it's fun watching Let's Players just holding down the arrow keys and watching this character just stutter jerkily across the screen, and it only dawns on them a couple of minutes later that, oh, I don't have to actually hold the key down. Oh my god, he just stepped off a ledge. Um, those were
Well,
fun.
see. Here's the thing. I didn't have problems with that, obviously, because I grew up with Sierra games, so I didn't have problems with that. So maybe that's why I found it maybe a little easier than some people did.
Well, you probably also knew that you could use diagonal keys, and it's
Right.
amazing watching so many Let's Players try to play that game with just the 4 arrow keys instead of
Hmm.
using the numpad for diagonal keys. Honestly, we're not entirely sure how people have managed to get past the Yeti without using diagonal keys. We know it can be done if you really abuse the hell out of that skidding system across the eyes. This is not going to make any sense to people who haven't played Stair Quest.
Yeah. No, we're getting off topic.
Yeah, sorry. Um, I didn't. I just want to.
It's a good type of off topic, I think. This is
Okay.
indie game riot. Let's talk about indie games, and that's an indie game. So and there we go.
Yeah. I just want to put it out that if you're frustrated with StairQuest, just know that I didn't design any of the levels. I just wrote parser responses in it, and I can circle that back to Phil's game to Snail Trek because of the amount of things you can throw at that game, just off color things, like
Hmm.
you walk up to a snail and type lick buttocks. For some reason, it understands this and it actually has a message for it. Um, having to I think the reason why games started moving away from the parser was not just because games were becoming more graphically intensive and they cost more
Well,
money to
also
make and
because it
such.
was annoying as fuck to try to figure out what it wanted you to do sometimes
There's
back in
that,
the
and
day.
also it's an awful lot of strain for writers because now they don't
Mm-hmm.
just have to, you've got a parser system, fine, just go and write the game. Like Infocom, I almost want to say had it easy because they had that Z thing coded up, it was ready to go. The author just really had to sit down and write the game and not have to worry about game, graphics logic and all this junk, all these things that have to come together in a graphic adventure game. And maybe laziness, I don't know. But anyway, having to write a parser game means
Yeah.
having to put in you have to really have a lot of foresight into what players might actually do. And that's an interesting story. The first Leisure Suit Larry game, the EGA game,
Mm-hmm.
uh, during testing, Al Lowe put in a little snippet of code when he gave the game out to testers. It would actually log everything that players typed into the parser. So when he got their copy back, there would be a little text file that had all of the things that people had tried to put into the
Mm-hmm.
parser. So he could just sit there and go through that and okay,
Yeah.
that needs a
Yeah.
response, that needs a response, and so forth. And that's
Yeah.
why the first Larry game is fantastic fun to play because it
Mm-hmm.
understands a whole hell of a lot. There's that story where he went into a boardroom. I think it was, I can't remember if it was Disney or something. Like Disney wanted to have a look at Leisure Suit Larry. Maybe they were trying to buy Sierra. I can't quite remember. But anyway, he was showing off this tawdry game to men in suits, people who make billions of dollars a month and such. And he was asking them, well, what do you want me to type into the parser? And someone in a suit and tie just shouted out, "Masturbate."
Yeah.
And he put it in.
As you
And
would.
yeah. And the game just and the game goes, the whole idea was to stop doing that, Larry. And the room erupts with laughter.
Yeah.
Because it actually gave a response instead of you can't do that right now or something.
Right. Exactly. And that is a very good point because that is how I test games. As probably nobody here knows, my first relatively successful game was Lucha City Mysteries within Second Life. And the way that I tested that game is that I gave it to a few people, and Second Life is a multiplayer environment, so you can play together. And so I would watch people, and I would watch what they try to do. And then I would take note of what they try to do, and then put responses to that. Like early on in the first episode of Litcher City Mysteries, The Delinquent Daughter, I noticed that people were going to Ricky, and then when Ricky didn't give them a response because he didn't want to talk to them, they would go back to Ernest. And I didn't anticipate that initially, right? But I would notice that they would always go back to Ernest and like ask him what to do. And so then I had to put a response. If you talk to Ernest after you talk to Ricky, he'll tell you, "Hey, what are you doing talking to me? Go question people or something. Aren't you a detective?" Right? I mean,
Exactly. And that's why
yeah.
testing is so important. Ron Gilbert makes a big stink about this on the Thimbleweed Park blog, and he's absolutely correct. The best way to test an adventure game is to sit someone who's never played it before down in front of the computer. You sit next to them with, your ass on your hands and, duct tape over your mouth. You're not allowed to give hints unless they are prepared to throw the computer out the window in frustration. You want to see what their problem solving are because as a designer, you have no way of knowing what's a difficult puzzle, what works and what not, because you've been mired in it for too
you
long.
really don't. You really have no idea, because my game right now is in beta. Unicorn Dungeon right now is in beta at this moment, and I have a similar approach to that. Even though it's not in Second Life, I decided that I really want immediate feedback from my players, and so I put in a feedback system into the game where the testers can just press report at any time and just report any thought that they're thinking. And it's amazing what you get back from that.
Oh yeah.
What
You got a lot of
what
swear
people
words, but
yeah, you do. You do. You get a lot of people saying this game is too frustrating. And that's one of the things you have to deal with as an adventure game designer too, is that at what point do you actually believe that the game is too frustrating? Because people will say that. Here's a good example. Another Lucha City Mysteries example. Someone wrote me a PM and said, okay, I've talked to everyone. I've tried every single item. I don't have any idea what to do. There's no way I can progress in this game. Literally 10 minutes later, I got another one that said, okay, we figured it out.
yep. Yeah, that's what happens. We actually wanted to do kind of what Allo did with StairQuest. We wanted to have a living parser. We just didn't really figure out how to do it, and especially not in AGS. We made StairQuest in AGS, but we wanted it to be so that when you typed in something that the game did not understand, it would shoot off. It would shoot off that response to a website somewhere, and then authors could go in, writers, me included, could go in and look at that list and see if something deserved to be put in the parser again. So it would have this living parser that was constantly being updated. Didn't actually get around to doing that, but that would be a cool idea. And again, circling back to Snail Trek, I am quite amazed at how non-obtrusive the puzzles are, logic, and they give good feedback. Being that I would imagine his testing team is quite small, if not comprised entirely of himself. I don't actually know.
I don't know either. I know that it is very hard to find testers. Like I said, my game's in beta right now. I advertised for a week straight on many different forums, Reddit, Twitter, adventure creator forums, itch.io. I advertised constantly to get testers. I got 10 total testers, and out of those 10 testers, only 2 people have completed the game. It is very, very hard to find testers. I'm gonna go to some of the comments right now because Tikan says, I like this Snail Trek rewards finding death scenes with achievements. This is something that I had an argument with Phil about some time ago. Not an argument, but a disagreement. A disagreement. I had a disagreement with Phil some time ago about whether death should always be avoidable. And I think death should always be avoidable. But Phil thinks that death should not always be avoidable and that death should be a learning experience. And what Tikan says clearly demonstrates Phil's perspective, because when I finished Snail Trek 1, I did not have all the points because clearly I didn't die enough, right? And that's Phil's perspective on games, apparently. My perspective on games is that dying is okay. You can die in my games too. I'm not one of those LucasArts pussies that where you can never die, but I don't think that dying should be a necessity to learn. I think you should be able to get through a game without dying.
Now let's be fair here. There are in fact 2 things we're talking about here. Death is a learning experience, as in you get in a situation where you have to die in order to know what it is you have to avoid
right.
Like
and that's what Phil thinks is okay. That's what Phil thinks is okay, and I don't think is okay.
But I've never. There isn't a puzzle in Snail Trek that actually requires you to die in order to know what to avoid later on. You can complete the game and not die. The other thing is, and this is what I really like, and I'm actually a bit on Tika's side on this one. What Snail Trek does is exactly what Space Quest does, which is that it rewards death hunting. The death scenes in Space Quest were so graphically over the top and hilarious that people would actually go out of their way to try and
Yeah.
get Roger Wilco killed because it was just so much fun to see him die over and over again. And I
It
think Snail
is
Trek takes a
fun,
lot
but
of
I
inspiration from that.
don't agree that it should give you points.
That's replayability value in my. I mean, I will agree with you that if you go into a situation and it's full on Dragon Slayer shit, where I didn't possibly see this coming, and I have to restore my game and just memorize when I have to step out of the way because something is gonna fly up and kill me. That's bad game design. I don't agree with you when you say that death shouldn't give you points because that's replay value. You don't finish a game the first time and expect a full score because then what's your motivation to go back and try new shit?
But I mean, where you get your additional score is through additional exploration, through trying different things. This is of course a friendly argument, right?
Oh, sure.
It's
Absolutely.
a friendly argument among game developers, but I completely disagree with Phil about the fact that dying should give you points, or that dying should be how you learn how to do what you're doing. I do disagree with him on that point.
I can see where you're coming from. Now let me back that up and look at it at a different angle. Most of the time in games, not just adventure games, but in any games, death is something to be avoided. A game over state is considered a failure. And I might be biased, being the Space Quest historian and all, but I love what Space Quest did as probably the first game in history.
Well, no, good. No, I agree with you.
Dying.
Yeah. Well, good death screens are definitely important when you die a lot, because you don't want death to be so annoying. Although even in Space Quest, death was sometimes really annoying because you died so often that you got the same death screen over and over again. But still, I agree with you on that point. That having good death screens is really important for keeping player engagement. The only thing I disagree with is that death should be something that gives you points or that should inform your decisions.
Right. I can agree with you on the inform the decisions. The points thing I think is replayability value. And yeah, that's pretty much it really. And also most of the deaths in Snail Trek are completely avoidable, I think. In fact, if you finish it without a full score because you missed a couple of deaths, you actually have to really go explore. Because the game, it's not like, a Sierra game where, you step too close to the ledge, you fall off and die. There are, you really have to work. I think the only thing that gave me a couple of headaches where I kept dying was in Snail Trek 2 when the ship would just bank off and shoot down into the abyss. It did that a couple of times before I figured out what the hell was I supposed to do. That's the only part.
Yeah. It did it once for me. I don't know. I'm just saying. I'm not saying I'm smarter than you, but
Oh no. Again, passionate people having a spirited discussion. That's what we're doing.
But one of the things that I noticed is that I only had that problem with Snail Trek 1, because 2 and 3 I got all the points. Maybe because I died enough. I don't know. But in Snail Trek 1 I did not get all the points. But in Snail Trek 2 and 3 I got all the points.
Since we're still on the positives, I think Tika wrote somewhere up further up in the chat that the music, and I think Phil did the music on his own. I don't know if he sourced it somewhere. I think he did it on his own. Anyway, if he didn't, then it's really well selected, and if he did it on his own, then it's really fucking rocking. The music, it's this strange mixture of whimsical meets. And then there's this fucking dubstep theme that comes out of nowhere, which is surprisingly kick-ass for dubstep, if I must say so.
Yeah.
So I think the music is really well put together.
Yeah.
Or the soundtrack.
Definitely agree on that. Let's see. So Josh says, I agree with Vance with death. In the majority of games, it comes off as not fair. It's not avoidable. I think most of the time you should at least have a chance at survival, which rewards skill. Okay, yeah, that's basically what I already said.
Yeah.
So
I mean, all Sierra games loved throwing you into a situation where
yeah,
you couldn't
yeah,
see it coming, and that
yeah,
sucks. If you're gonna kill off a character, at least give them fair warning.
yeah. And I am much more, as you might be able to tell, I'm much more a Sierra fan than I am a LucasArts fan. But certainly one of the things that Sierra did, in my opinion, wrong in their early days is the random deaths, the completely random deaths. And have you played the King's Quest reboot? I know you're not a King's Quest fan. I know you're not a King's Quest fan, but it's actually a really good game. It's actually, if you play the King's Quest reboot, I'm pretty much going to guarantee you'll enjoy it. It is
them strong words.
It is a really, really good game.
All right.
And it is not.
Can you die in it?
No, it is very much a modern adventure game in that way. Yeah, you can't die in it. You can't get stuck. You can't do anything that will screw you over.
Parentheses. Another thing that I really appreciate about Phil is, although he kept deaths in, which to some LucasArts purists might seem unfair or unwarranted or whatever, he did not include any Walking Dead scenarios. He did not include any of those cock block moments where, oh, you forgot to pick up this ball of cheese at the start of the game. Sorry. Even though you're right at the end, you'll have to start the game over. Fuck you.
Although, to be honest, I think most adventure games by the mid '90s had done away with those.
Yeah, they did.
I mean, we're talking about really early stuff that had those kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna have to play fair and of course, point at one of the most egregious examples of that, which is Space Quest 1. There's that glass shard in front of your shuttle, and if you don't pick that up and go down the elevator...
Oh my god. There's...
My friend Jess Moore
There's
said...
no way to even find that, because you click on your shuttle, and when I first played that, I examined my shuttle. I walked up to my shuttle, I examined my shuttle, I typed examine shuttle. I don't know if I wasn't standing in the right place, or I didn't type the right thing. I even did what I should have done, right? I went up to my shuttle and I examined the shuttle and I tried to find what I could find, and I still didn't find that shard.
My friend Jess Morissette, who's the owner of the, he will argue first ever fan site for a game ever, Roger Wilco's Virtual Broom Closet. He one of his favorite stories to tell is that he was stuck for an entire year in 1986, 1987, on that puzzle. He could not find the glass shard, and he still, has in fact told Scott Murphy to his face that he still harbors some resentment on that particular point. And he is, next to me. I think Jess and I are probably the biggest fans of Space Quest in the entire world. No offense to anyone else. And certainly, I'm willing to be challenged on that.
I'm a pretty big fan of it, but you are definitely a bigger fan of it than I am, which is saying something, because I'm a pretty big fan of it. Space Quest, even though I played adventure games before Space Quest is basically what inspired me to become a game developer. Nice. And I think you are a bigger fan of Space Quest than I am, so yeah.
I have played it a bit. I must say, yes. But I will knock it when it deserves it. And that glass puzzle, which by the way Scott Murphy has apologized for, but it can unequivocally go fuck itself.
Yeah.
At least in the VGA version, it kind of like sparkles a bit when you crash land the shuttle. So, okay, there's something there. Cool. And
that's a good apology. Last time I was at GDC this past year, I went to a talk by the game designer for Telltale's The Walking Dead. And have you played that? The first season.
Other things that can go fuck.
I know you hate Telltale. I know you hate Telltale.
I don't hate them, but I hate QTE sequences, and they're just chock full of them.
But the first season of The Walking Dead by Telltale is superb. but I went to this talk by this guy, and he apologized to everyone jokingly, but he apologized for the wrench puzzle. And I was like, that's the only fucking puzzle in the game. Like, that's the only real puzzle in the game. Like, you're apologizing to people for making them actually think about things. Like that I think that is a fair but only slightly difficult puzzle. But of course, the shard puzzle is something different. But anyway, as we're saying, let's catch up on the chat. What is it saying?
The save system. Yeah.
The save system to me, it basically, whenever I died, I almost started where I left off. So it, as far as I could tell, it saved constantly.
When you die, it just gives you a try again, and this was something that Sierra Games also started introducing, because a lot of people were frustrated with the fact that they had to constantly keep save games. It actually hindered, their lust for exploration, because they were afraid to go into new rooms and try and poke shit because they might die and they save hours ago.
Which I think is something that modern adventure games do all the time now, right? You don't have a big problem these days with being afraid to explore. Although I think modern adventure games go in the opposite direction sometimes, especially the more popular ones, of just not being able to die at all. But that kind of goes a little bit back to our old discussion. I think you should be able to die, but you shouldn't be able to die as a learning experience. But I think a lot of modern games you can't die at all. But I like the fact that you can die, but as soon as you die, you just end up back where you were to try again. And that to me, it fosters the feeling of danger, which I think that a game needs. But also, it doesn't make you do things you've already done before. Because that's what a lot of the old games did. Like, I already know how to do this. This isn't fun. It's not interesting to do the same things that I've already done before.
Right.
So, you're punishing me for trying new things. And so, yeah, that
should be a reward in a way. It should be, if you go into a dangerous situation, a game should tell you that you're walking into a dangerous situation, or at least somewhat telegraph it. I think Beneath the Steel Sky does that fantastically, because for the most part you can't die. You can't direct the protagonist to do something incredibly stupid. You can't tell him to go stick his finger in a light socket or hurl himself off the side of the building, because why would he do that? But near the end of the game, you walk into an abandoned subway tunnel, and you walk into this room where the support beams are clearly giving way and pebbles are falling from the ceiling, and the main character says, "Uh-oh, I'd better do something fast." That's telegraphing to me that I'm in a dangerous situation where I can die.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the things that Snail Trek did very, very well. We have a lot of comments here. Let's see what's up.
Tika's loving this discussion, as far as I can tell. Yeah, modern adventure games. I'm not gonna knock too much on modern adventure games, because I think they also do things that are right, and I think in particular,
that's true. Adventure games have definitely evolved over time.
Hey, it's interesting. Josh just wrote that Wadget Eye has done a good job at preserving the intelligent puzzle design. It's interesting that you should bring up, because I was just going to say Dave Gilbert has really taken some of the criticism that's usually levied at old adventure games and refined it without losing what at least made adventure games interesting to me, which was you're interacting in a story, and you are solving problems in order to go from A to B to C. But it's not necessarily a case of, well, I'm controlling the dumbest person in the world, so stepping out 3 feet into a shoreline is going to whoosh me away by a magic current and
Yeah.
just drown me, because
Yeah.
fuck you, don't go in the water.
Yeah. Although, I mean, I have my criticisms of Dave's designs as well. I think that, and Dave also has admitted many times in his talks and whatnot that he hates puzzles. And I think Dave's games don't have challenging enough puzzles. They have great stories. He's a great story writer. I think that the games that Dave designs don't have challenging enough puzzles. Although some of the games that he publishes certainly do, right? But the games that he designs seem not challenging enough for me. You know what I'm saying?
That's the old question of, what am I playing an adventure game for? Am I playing it to be challenged? I was gonna say mentally challenged. That's not the correct phrase. Hashtag second language. But am I, challenge the old
Intellectually
gray matter?
challenged. Yeah.
Or am I playing it because I want to experience a story?
Well, I think it's both things, right? When you're playing an adventure game, if you're an adventure game player, as I certainly am, and you certainly are, when you are at your core an adventure game player, I think you want both things. I think you want an engaging and interesting story, and you also want to be challenged. And I think Dave's games, not to get off track from Phil's games, but Dave's games are really good at engaging, interesting stories, but not so good at challenging puzzles.
No, and he admits that. That's because he hates puzzle solving. He wants to tell the story, and that's basically his drive for making games. There is that fine balance that you have to have between challenging the player on an intellectual level and not, just holding them back from experiencing the rest of the story.
Right.
I'll give you an example. I fucking hate Myst.
I fucking hate Myst too. We have that in common.
The reason why I fucking hate it is because it makes me feel dumb. And it makes me feel dumb because it is very much story second and puzzles first. And it's the sort of annoying, pull a lever, see what happens. I'm not going to explain the rules to you, fuck you kind of puzzles. I will
argue that Myst is not an adventure game. I will argue that all day long. Myst is not an adventure game. Myst is a puzzle game.
But then again, I love games like Gone Home, which barely have any puzzles, if any at all, and it is just straight up a story experience.
Sure, but that's also not an adventure game. That I don't know. That maybe I'm dogmatic, but Gone Home is a good game, but it's not an adventure game. Myst, to some people, it's probably a good game. People like it. I don't, but it's not an adventure game. Myst is a puzzle game. Gone Home is a walking simulator story game. Neither of them are adventure games, because adventure games are games, no matter how hard the puzzles are, they at least have some. You have to use your wits to get through the story. That is, to me, an adventure game. If there's no story, it's not an adventure game. I mean, okay, if the puzzles are not related to the story, it's not an adventure game. That's Myst. The puzzles there are not related to the story. There's a story of sorts, but the puzzles aren't related to the story. The puzzles are disconnected. And Gone Home doesn't have any puzzles. It's just a story. So both of those, to me, are not even adventure games. They're interesting games, but they're not adventure games to me.
That's an interesting, and I will say, not that I think you're wrong or anything. I will say I used to think like that, and in recent years I've started to sort of accept, probably through the prodding of my colleagues over at the Backseat Designers podcast, started to think more loosely in terms of what defines an adventure game, because they started calling me an old codger, and sometimes the lines get blurred, because one of my absolute favorite games of all time, Tex Murphy, The Pandora Directive, has these standard, adventure game puzzles. Pick this shit up, use it somewhere else, talk to this character, convince them to do shit for you. Standard adventure game fare. And then every once in a while, it throws in a quote-unquote missed puzzle, like a logic puzzle, the seventh guest style, where you just have to move these chess pieces around the board for fuck knows what reason. And I always skip them because, again, those make me feel dumb.
And I mean, so here's a question for you then. Do you consider the seventh guest to be an adventure game?
No, that's a puzzle game.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I consider Myst to be too. Myst is a puzzle game. It's not an adventure game, right?
The Witness is a puzzle game. Just to put in a modern example. But occasionally the line gets blurred. Have you played the Take-Two's Black Dahlia?
I have not, no.
Or Ripper or something. These are some of the most infuriatingly difficult games because they are adventure games and they have very, very difficult. The logic puzzles are integrally connected to the plot and the story that it's trying to tell. They're just very, very obtuse and hard to figure out. And they have a very good linear story and everything. It's just they are abysmally difficult.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a place for hard puzzles in adventure games, of course. Have you played Shardlight?
Yes, loved it to bits, but that might be because I think Francisco Gonzalez is one of the sexiest men alive.
But
checks in the mail, dude.
when I was talking to him one time, he apologized for the chalk puzzle, and I was
People
like,
apologize for anything.
Yeah, I mean, the chalk puzzle was my favorite part of the game. You had to figure out what you had to do, and you had to do it, and it wasn't just click this on that. You actually had to logically figure out what you had to do. I loved that puzzle. That was my favorite puzzle of the game.
It was a little, you mean the one where you have to draw the symbols?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a little finicky. Sometimes it wouldn't recognize the shape, and you go, that fucking looks like the... Oh, okay.
No, if you drew it correctly, it would recognize it. You were drawing it wrong. Yeah.
I probably was. But yeah, I mean, I love Shardlight a bit, and Shardlight also has... Well, it is light on puzzle, but the puzzles are integral to the story. It's not like... I mean, I was just on another stream earlier today where we were playing Phantasmagoria, and that is just... they didn't even bother putting in puzzles, honestly. Phantasmagoria 2 is even worse. I
have played the first one. I have not played the second one. I do own it on Steam. I'll play it one day. But...
Give it a go, because you go through the entire game basically not solving any puzzles. You just click on people, initiate conversation, and just sit back and watch it. And I kind of like the game in an odd way. And then right at the end, as the danger music kicks in and you're sprinting for the exit and things are blowing up all around you, all of a sudden the game reminds itself, oh wait, I'm supposed to be an adventure game, aren't I? And then it throws a fucking logic puzzle at you as the music is blaring, as alarms are going off, shit's blowing up. It's connect the wire to the fucking...
Yeah.
Really strange.
I'm gonna call a 1 minute break because I have to take a piss. So I will be right back and talk amongst yourselves.
All right. Well, hi everyone. I have taken control because my name is Trolls.
I'll pop in since he's doing that, so I don't have to.
I no longer have control.
Since I don't want to edit this out because I'm a lazy fuck. So you guys. I mean, I love adventure games, but you guys are obviously way off the charts with some of that. I'm also tweeting out to Francisco. We had him on our show once, and I like to make him blush from time to time.
He loves that.
There you go. So going back to Snail Quest, since that's the main point of this month's Indie Fireside.
Yes.
Which of the three did you enjoy the most?
Well, it's interesting question because, as we all know, Snail Trek 4, the conclusion to the saga, hasn't been released yet. But of the three that I've played so far, I think I probably enjoyed the second one the most, and primarily because I was able to switch between characters, and it almost gave it a sort of Lost Vikings kind of feel. I was almost anticipating that you'd have to, yeah, and you actually did. You had to solve puzzles like in tandem with the other character. You had to switch back and forth, put one snail in one position, switch over to the other, have that one perform some function, then switch back to the first one and do something, and that's how you solve.
There was a game that was like that. I mean, because I mentioned Thimbleweed Park earlier in the chat, where you know, because you're switching back and forth there, but it's not necessarily that you're solving puzzles in tandem. But there was a game that was like that, and I can't think of it.
Goblins.
No, I mean maybe, but that's not what I was thinking of. But anyway, I one thing that I feel like in adventure games in general that Snail Trek for what it is, you know, being one guy making this game for, you know, to buy for $1 a piece, has done a really good job is adding in mechanics that you don't normally see in like the traditional adventure games, and I feel like adventure games are kind of missing that in a lot of games nowadays, because I'm not a programmer, I'm not a game dev, but I'm trying to teach myself C#, and the first game that I want to make is an adventure game, and I think that one of the really important things to making it stand out now is to have these cool mechanics involved in adventure games, because it's not really done too much nowadays.
All right, I'm back, by the way.
Hello.
There he is. I was just picking
So
up because I didn't feel like editing out your
Dennis?
piss break.
Yeah. Man, I had to take a piss like a fucking racehorse. Sorry about that.
That happens.
I was talking to him about interesting mechanics in adventure games that are not necessarily traditional.
Mm-hmm.
And the tag team thing in Snail Trek 2, where you had to switch between characters, is one of those. And I guess, you know, putting the disguise on and off makes you able to squeeze through certain parts of the ship in the third game and such.
Although, did you really think that switching between characters was a novel feature? I mean, it was certainly a feature that made that particular game interesting.
It wasn't necessarily
but
that. It was more the fact that it was that you had to do.
It wasn't a feature that was unheard of.
It wasn't. It wasn't
don't
that.
get
It
me
was the fact that you had to do it in tandem and solve puzzles that way.
Day of the Tentacle, one of the most popular adventure games of all time, did the exact same thing. Maniac
Yeah.
Mansion, the first point-and-click game. did the
Maniac
exact
Mansion,
same
yeah.
thing. But
Yeah.
it's just refreshing to see that, because what I find from modern adventure games is that they're very linear and they're very protagonist-driven. And as we were talking about earlier, sometimes they don't even give a lot of thought into interactivity. It's basically, I want to tell a story. I can't find a book publisher, so I'll make a game instead. That's basically the vibe that I'm getting from a lot of modern adventure
Well,
games.
I don't know if you've played The New Guys. It's actually spelled Da New Guys. It's by Chris Jones, who is the author of Adventure Creator. But before he made Adventure Creator, he was actually an adventure creator. And
What
he
became
made a
Adventure Game Studio?
No. No. Sorry.
Chris Jones made
is
Adventure-
Chris Jones is Adventure Game Studio. Chris. There's another Chris who made Adventure Creator. Who is Chris?
Why
There-
are you thinking of
Chris,
that?
Adventure Creator.
Why are you thinking of that? Before I pop out, I just want to point out in chat, Tegan Gia said, wanted to ask you, trolls, do you have any pull at getting Activision to hire Phil for a Space Quest reboot? And he also mentioned that he thought it was novel that is specifically a text parser would do that. So with that,
yeah.
I will pop back up.
I did see the question. God, I wish. If I had any pull at Activision in the slightest, I would get them to hand over the license to Space Quest 2, the two guys from Andromeda, in a heartbeat. Because those are the people who need to do a Space Quest reboot. Phil does a phenomenal job. Phil, I think, is much better off doing his original stuff, because Phil does Phil. And the two guys from Andromeda do two guys from Andromeda the best. So that's my 2 cents anyway. I mean, we all saw where it went with Space Quests 5 and 6. I mean, it was sort of, but not quite Space Quest, much like Monkey Island 3 was sort of, but not quite Monkey Island. You need both of these guys working on a Space Quest game before I will sign off on it being, a Space Quest game. To be honest, no offense to Josh Mandel, who tried his best with Space Quest 6. No offense to Mark Crow and David Sell of Dynamics, who tried their best with Space Quest 5. It's like if I went in and tried to write a Snail Trek game. It might be funny, might even be playable, God knows, but it wouldn't be a Phil Fortier game.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I'm catching up on the. Oh, go ahead.
I was just thinking, I have actually thought of, because you said before we started that what we're going to do is we're going to talk about all the good things about Snail Trek, and then we're going to talk about things that we feel could be improved.
Yeah.
And I've actually thought of something, and it's a big one.
Well, let me catch up on the chat here real quick.
Sure. Because before the show was like, I don't actually have any complaints about Snail Trek. It's going to be a short chat, isn't it? But I've actually thought of one.
There was one thing in the chat. Where is it? Oh yeah. So Tikon says, I think in modern adventure games, people want to be challenged on skill and not intelligence, and that makes me think of something that Roberta Williams once said in an interview, which is possibly controversial. But what Roberta said was, she said, well, back when I was making adventure games, the only people who owned computers were smart people. So we made games for smart people.
Wow, Roberta, come on. Jesus. That's harsh.
I mean, she said that in the late 90s, by the way. It wasn't even late.
Well, at that point, I think she was getting a bit frustrated because Sierra Online had basically gotten stolen from under their feet by fraudulent companies cooking the books, laying off people. Late 90s was not a fun time to be a Space Quest fan or to be a Sierra employee.
I remember being inconsolably sad when Sierra was sold off from its owners, Ken and Roberta. That was a sad time.
But then again, it was inevitable. I mean, Ken Williams was a bona fide capitalist. He wanted to make money. Roberta wanted to make games. Ken wanted to make money. So going public with Sierra, by the time he did that, the writing was on the wall.
Although, have you seen modern interviews with Ken? Because the latest interview I saw with Ken, he said going public was the worst decision I ever made.
Yeah, he's softened a bit, but I mean I think that whole incident showed him what unbridled capitalism will do. It'll fuck you in the ass in the end.
Yeah.
And not in the kind way.
And I mean, at the time, they were young entrepreneurs taking on the world, and he thought that's what you do. You go
Sierra
public.
Was the dream factory.
Fuck, man. Sierra was the king of games back in the day.
Shit, yeah.
The king of games.
But it wasn't, and I still thought that for the longest time, being a wild-eyed teenager in the 90s, until I somehow got into an ICQ conversation with Josh Mandel maybe a few years after he left Sierra. It must have been like 97 or 98 perhaps. And he basically laid the whole thing out, because Sierra didn't, of course, say, oh, by the way, we're ousting Ken. Ken still wrote editorials for Interaction magazine. They still pretended that everything was all fancy and fun within the Sierra walls until everything suddenly wasn't. Josh Mandel told me about the inner machinations of what Sierra had become in the mid-90s, specifically around 95 to 96, when shit started to go sour. The company got too big, and he basically had to pack up and leave in the middle of Space Quest 6, not because he didn't like the game, but because he was just simply so fed up with managers and producers and people who didn't know an adventure game from their own assholes.
That's when they revised his puzzle in Space Quest 6, right? The infamous responder puzzle, the radio transmitter puzzle.
Oh, the data quarter thing.
Yeah.
That's a weird thing. There was actually in the original design document, he left behind the design document for Scott Murphy, who then took over sort of unwillingly as the lead designer and writer of the game. He left behind instructions that the data quarter puzzle is solved like this, and you're supposed to put that hint on a disc in the apartment where you're
exactly,
in.
yeah.
And Josh Mandel
Like, he
calls
had
him
the
up.
whole thing planned out, like, to a T, and they just decided, okay, we're going to relegate this to the manual.
Yeah, and that was because Josh Mandel phoned him up like a couple of months before release and said, "Oh, by the way, did you ever do anything with this? There was supposed to be a comic book on one of the CDs, and the solution was going to be in the comic book." And he said, "Did you do anything with the comic book?" And he said, "Nah, we're not going to do that. It seemed extraneous. Took too much time." And he went, "Are you fucking kidding me? The solution to the data quarter puzzle, the hardest puzzle in the game, is in there." It's like, "Oh shit, is it really?" Oh shit, we have to put that in the manual instead.
Yeah.
Yes, Grundislav, I have been up all night. Thank you for asking.
Okay, so let's get down to the negative things. Let's get negative. Let's get negative. Negative. Is that something that I should sing? I don't know.
I don't know.
All right, so I'll let you go first because you had something to say.
I had two things, a minor one and then a slightly bigger one. And the minor one is that I think the hint system got intrusive. We were talking earlier about hand-holding the player, and the hints in Snail Trek cannot be turned off. You can turn on and off everything else, but the hints, the ones that say, go up to the console and type use, or go listen to the snails, they have something interesting to say. It's like, fuck you, I wanna do this on my own, I wanna explore, don't hold my hand. That's one thing. The bigger one, I don't know if you want to respond to that one first, actually.
Except for the fact that I completely agree, and that was on my list of things to say. I completely agree with that. Even to the point, not even just the hint system. Like in Snail Trek 3, where you can listen to the snail's conversation, if you do it enough times, they give you so many hints that it's obvious what you need to do. I don't want to be told what to do. I want to figure it out for myself. I want to figure out that I need to go back to the ship and get the lettuce concentrate. I don't want the snail conversation to tell me that if I have listened to the receiver 4 times. You know, I don't want that level of hints.
Yeah,
I'll figure that out eventually.
There's that thing that people like to put in games, the objective list, which I guess it's a rollover from RPG games, because RPG quests get so convoluted that you have to keep a log over what you're supposed to do. But in adventure games, like the Telltale Back to the Future games, they put up this big fucking objective blinking at the top of the screen. Just going, you have to get into the basement of the speakeasy. It's like, I know. I was just in there. There's a locked door. I think I could figure that out myself.
But I mean, you know, and I know that Telltale games are not made for adventure game fans. They're made for the fans of the property that they have licensed. So, Back to the Future games are made for Back to the Future fans, not adventure games fans. Walking Dead games are made for Walking Dead fans, not adventure game fans, right?
Sure.
So, I mean, when you go into like Sam & Max or something, then obviously, fans of Sam & Max are adventure game fans because they're fans of Sam & Max, right? But most of Telltale's properties are movie properties. The people who are playing those games aren't adventure game players. Right, they want those hits. That's fine for those games.
That's a fair point.
But I think Phil's fans are adventure game players. I would wager that all of Phil's fans are adventure game players. They're adventure game fans.
Not only that, but a subset of adventure game fans, a niche fan, that old farts like you and me who know the joys and frustrations of arguing with a parser all night because, fuck getting sleep. You have to get up for school tomorrow. Fuck that. I want to get to the next screen kind of thing. Yeah. Back when you had free time. Not like a modern event, like a Life is Strange, Gone Home type player. They're going to look at this text parser and go, yeah, that's a bit too much effort. Fuck this.
Yeah.
The other one I had is, well, it's something that I wish more adventure games would do, and Snail Trek doesn't. So this is more of an excuse to bring it up, actually. Which is that we were talking earlier about how adventure games, modern adventure games, certainly also older classic adventure games, have very linear stories, and they're basically, you get from point A to point B to point C. Some of them even lock you off in small sections. Techno Babylon, I'm looking at you. Love you, by the way, but they lock you off in small sections.
Yeah.
And just expect you to solve this puzzle and then move on to the next. Whereas, what I truly enjoy about adventure games, as opposed to reading a book or watching a movie, is that it gives you freedom of movement.
Yeah.
And it gives you a bunch of places to go and puzzles to solve out of order. LucasArts, for, as much shit as they've been given doing this podcast, were masters at this.
Sure.
Especially the Day of the Tentacle.
Absolutely, I give credit where credit is due. They were awesome at that. Yeah.
And what I like about that is that as a game player, you're free to explore. Actually, let me give you an example of that. Again, let's go back to Leisure Suit Larry, because again, you can say what you want about the content of the games, but what Leisure Suit Larry 6 and 7 did was, I thought, brilliant, because it actually opens up the entire game world to you right from the start. You can go anywhere. Mm-hmm. There are maybe a few locked doors, but those are integral to puzzles. The rest of the place is just completely open to you, and it just expects you to get on with it and just walk up, find a problem, and then solve it. If you can't solve that, go find another problem and solve that instead. And the whole thing then coalesces into an ending. I thought that was brilliant. That's what interactive mediums can do that linear medium can't. More games should do this. Have an open world where you can explore it at your leisure. Have several problems for you to solve. Snail Trek does not do that. Snail Trek is linear, so I guess
I thought Snail Trek had the opportunity to do that at one point, though. By Snail Trek 3, there were several different places that you could go. You could go back to the ship, you could go to the ledge, you could go to the cave, you could go outside, you could go inside the lab. But it squandered that to a large extent, because it told you what to do. And when I mean, as one would naturally do, I kept listening to the snails, because as a seasoned adventure game player, I'm going to keep listening to them until they say something different, because that's what adventure players do, right? If they're not saying something different, I'm going to keep listening to them. I'm going to keep typing listen over and over again until they start repeating themselves, because that's what adventure game players do. But by that point, they've already told me what to do. I think Phil probably thought that people would listen one time or two times and then try something and come back. But what really happens with at least seasoned adventure game players is that we're going to keep listening constantly until it changes, and then we'll know everything to do. If all of your hints are in that dialogue, we're going to know everything to do.
Well, I think the other thing to realize about Snail Trek is also, yes, it basically gives you the solutions to the puzzles, which I guess is fair. I mean, if you have some semblance of self-control and you're not the seasoned adventure game player that you describe, you can just stop listening to the snails after the second or third time and just go off and solve. Anyway, that's not what I wanted to say.
I'll stop you for a second, and I'll say that, okay, so my third game in the Lucha City Mystery series, I originally had it such that certain characters gave you random responses. And sometimes the responses would be the same because they were randomized. They were completely randomized what responses the characters would give you. And the feedback I got from my adventure game playing players was, listen, this is how people play adventure games. We're only going to listen until we get a repeat.
Yeah.
So
we're,
if
we're
you
conditioned, to keep doing that.
So if you repeat something, we're never going to try that again. We're going to figure that we have heard. We're going to do this until we get a repeat, and then we're never going to do it again. I had people stuck on puzzles that had clear hints in dialogue because I had randomized my dialogue. And
Tricky shit.
this is the thing that you have to realize, is that you have to understand your players. If your players are seasoned adventure game players, which Phil's players are, this is what they're going to do. They're going to go and do the thing over and over again until it does not any longer yield a different result.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what adventure game players do.
Yep.
And that's what the mistake that I made in my game initially, which I changed for the release version, of course, is I made it linear. I made all of the responses linear. You talk to them one time and they give you one response, the next time a different response, and then you get to the end and then they start repeating themselves. Right? It was linear. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They would give you a response in order, because adventure game players don't continue to do things that don't yield results. But in the same respect, you have to realize that adventure game players will continue to do things until they don't yield results anymore. And so if all of the hints of that game are right there, I'm going to get all the hints right away, because I'm going to continue to do that.
Yeah. And I think one of the big no-nos of adventure game design, which I still see some adventure game designers do, is the repeat action. Basically, the thing is, I walk up and I talk to a character, and I have
a really good example of this, but I'm going to let you finish first, and then I'll get a type.
It's basically that, I tried this once, and it didn't work. And unless the game gives me a nudge or a clear indication that something has changed, then I'm not going to go back and do that again. And there are some instances where I think especially Jane Jensen's Mobius was very guilty of this, which was that if you tried to pick up an object, but you didn't, the protagonist didn't know that he needed that object later on, then he would refuse to pick it up, which led to this very bizarre situation where he would basically trek halfway across the world just to pick up a bottle of wine and then fly the fuck back and use it, because he didn't know he needed that bottle of wine until he was stuck at that particular point.
Yeah. I made that mistake in my first game, my first Lucha City Mysteries game too, is that you couldn't pick up a book until you knew that you needed it, and people got stuck on that all the time. But my big example of this is not even my game. It's a game that was on Kickstarter about a year ago, and it had a playable demo, which is, of course, good if you're doing a Kickstarter.
Always playable demos. Always playable demos.
And I played the demo, and here was the problem. The art was great. The dialogue was good. I would have backed this project, but I didn't because the puzzle design was so bad. And I'm not going to say what the project was, but I will say that there was this one puzzle that you had to try something 4 times before it worked. The protagonist of the game refused to do what you said to do. The first time he's like, I'm not going to touch that. And then the second time, no, I'm not going to do that. You had to try the same thing 4 times before it worked. Which was the same. Yeah, which is what I was saying before. Adventure game players will not continue to try things if they don't work. Mm-hmm. Adventure game players they have really good adventure game players have like a 0-1 switch going on in their head, right? You're like, okay, I tried this, tick it off. I tried this, tick it off. I tried this, tick it off. And they're not going to try it again. They're not going to try to do the same thing 4 times with no indication that it ever might work.
Yeah.
And that's why I didn't back that project. Despite the fact that the art was great and the and otherwise it seemed like the guy kind of knew what he was doing, but the puzzle design was terrible. There were other puzzles that were also terrible. Anyway, the guy was terrible at designing puzzles. But anyway, I mean, the dialogue was great, the art was great, but the guy was terrible at designing puzzles.
And then it becomes no fun to play the game. I will also going back to my point about having the open world. It's directly tied to having more than one objective at any given point. Snail Quest, of course, has a single objective for each game. That's why they're 20-minute games. So I can't really, in good conscience, fault Snail Trek for not giving me several puzzle chains to work on simultaneously. I will, however, say that it's kind of a plea to indie game developers out. Sorry, just knocked my microphone. Indie game developers out there is to please have more than one puzzle chain going. I was playing a game recently called what was her name? Agatha Knife. That was it.
I watched you play that, actually. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, great. I loved it to bits because it was weird and it was freaky and it had blood and guts everywhere. But one thing I really wish that it had done was, because it gives you this big laundry list of shit you have to do. You have to start your own religion. You have to find a book. You have to write stuff in the book. You have to find a robe. You have to do all of this shit. Instead of just giving you the laundry list and then throw you into the world and have at it, go do something, it gives you these objectives one by one. Expects you to go off and solve this bit. Now come back to me and tell me you've done it, and I will give you the next objective, and so on and so forth. And I was actually stuck for a long time. I don't know if you saw that. I was stuck for a very, very long time.
I saw you off and on playing it, so I don't remember seeing you stuck. But
all right. Because I had neglected to go back and tell the person that I had completed his objective. May I have the next one, please? I was stuck for like a half an hour. Because, thinking, okay, I must be missing some clue somewhere. No, all I had to do was go back and tell him, good, I'm done now. Can I have the next one, please? That was a missed opportunity on a grand scale. Because if they'd just done the LucasArts thing and just given you a laundry list of shit to do and just fuck off into the world and do it, hey, could have been so much better.
Yep.
That's really all the negative I can think of. The hint system is intrusive, and I guess technically I can't really fault Snail Trek for the second point. So really, it's just the hint system that I didn't find appealing with Snail Trek.
So
I think we have to go to the chat for that one.
You've covered my entire negative spectrum on that game as well. My biggest negative aspect is exactly what you mentioned, and we've talked about it, is that it tells you what to do too much.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of letting you figure out what to do. Like I said before, his audience are adventure game players. So let people explore, let people play the game.
But let's not forget, because one thing, if you say this to an adventure game designer, say you tell the person that your game is too hand-holdy, let me explore, let me do shit, there is a risk that they will go Tim Schafer on you and pull a Broken Sword, Broken Age Part 2. And just make the game fucking stupid. Because there's one thing that's important, is have a clear goal. What do you expect me to do? Let me go and figure out how to do it, but give me a clear goal on what you expect me to do, because Space Quest, I'm gonna knock it if it deserves it, and Space Quest is infamous for just shoving you into a situation and just, not telling you what it wants from you. Basically just go find something that'll kill you, avoid that and then go do this other thing.
There are certain instances in Space Quest like that. Not actually that many. I just recently played the entire Space Quest series last year, and I actually found relatively few of those situations comparable to other games of the time.
True. King's Quest, not that I've played much of it.
The fucking one where you have to say a certain thing to the king of the Oompa Loompas or whatever they are. He says, say the word or something, and you have to say the word. That's ridiculous.
Well, that's funny. I mean, that's kind of a Douglas
It might
Adams
be
thing
funny,
to do.
but it's who's ever gonna do that? I mean,
It's kind of a throwback too. I mean, the only we were talking about repetition. the only game I think that got away with repetition, do the same thing over and over again, is the Infocom Hitchhiker's Guide game, where you go into the engine room with a heart of gold, and you type "look," and the game just goes, "There's nothing interesting in here," and you have to type "look" again. And he goes, "No, really, there's nothing interesting in here." And you look at it a third time, and he goes, "Okay, I'm going to describe the room for you, but I didn't want to do it because there's something incredibly dangerous in here." And then it describes it for you.
Sure.
Douglas Adams can get away with it.
Yeah.
No one else can.
But then the Hitchhiker's Guide game also has the fish puzzle, which is terrible.
Holy shit. It's terrible because it is trial and error, and you're on a timer or but he was doing that just to legitimately piss people off, and it going into that, right, it might not be fun to play, but then again, neither is games like The Witness and Myst to me, and other people find that sort of punishment fun, and they feel accomplished when they finally cracked it, whereas me, I just feel stupid and I want to crawl over and die somewhere.
So Tekken says, which is something that I want to bring up actually, is the cost of the game. So Tekken says the only other small negative is that it's drowning in a sea of $1 Steam games. So here's something that I wanted to bring up. What do you think about the cost of the game?
Well, I think it's very fair. I'm actually surprised it didn't cost like $2 or $3 per episode. But then again, people's expectations of game lengths are very much not in tune with how long it takes to make a game that meets those expectations.
Yeah.
I've seen people complain about what was it? There was a game I was looking at recently, which was a full-length game, and someone complained that for $6 the game wasn't really long enough, but by it was at least comparable in length to Space Quest 3, which was a full game that retailed at full price back in 1989. And I think the gaming public, I mean, you and I have made games. You probably more than I have. Certainly Francisco in the chat has. And we know it, at least us at the Backseat Designers, we know game developers. So we've dabbled in it, so we know that how long it actually takes to make a game. It's not just slap a few assets together and write some shit out. That actually takes longer than you expect. So faulting a game for not having the length you expect is that's bullshit.
Yeah.
However, with the amount of care and attention that's gone into it, not the length of the actual story or how long it takes to complete it advertises 20-minute game. The amount of care and effort that's gone into it, I think he's actually underselling the game. But I also know that the people who are buying it who are not necessarily deeply into adventure games, whoever they might be, they might look at it and go, well, why would I have to pay $3 for a game I can finish in 20 minutes?
Yep.
Then again, he says that it's drowning in a sea of $1 Steam games. And that might be true, but what Phil is doing that I think is very smart is that he's not trying to get featured on the Steam main page, or he's not making this for a wide audience. Like we were talking about previously. This is a niche audience, and he's even making it for a niche audience within a niche audience, which would be the old farts like you and me.
Yeah.
So he's quite adeptly gotten in contact with is networking on Twitter, just saying, hey, I've got this game. It is fantastically funny. Go and play it. I went and played it, and yes, it is fantastically funny. I'm going to spread the word. So he's relying on word of mouth. And if you got a good enough product, sorry, it's very late now, a good enough product, then word of mouth is your best friend ever.
Yep. Yeah. So, let me read what the cheap people in the chat. People pay $15 to see a 2-hour movie they can't take home, but they don't want to pay $15 for a 10-hour game they get to keep forever.
Yeah.
So I wonder how long in gameplay time, if you know, did it take you to complete the Snail Trek games? Because I know, because it's on Steam right here, I can check.
Oh, yeah. I was recording a video of it when I was playing it. So I was reading all the text aloud. So it took me longer than it would if I just played it on my own. And I did get stuck, as we were talking about earlier. I did get a bit stuck in Snail Trek 2. But by and large, I got through all of them within an hour. And that was, walking around, picking at shit, reading all the text aloud and all of that shit. Yep. So playing it at a snail's pace, if you'll forgive the pun, around an hour or so. But
yeah,
I should have prefaced this by saying that I've never really understood measuring game time because people play games differently. Some people get hung up on puzzles that others find exceptionally easy. So it's always been a strange metric to me, but that might be a discussion for a different time.
So I have my exact play times here, which I purposely started the game, immediately started playing the game, and immediately quit the game immediately upon winning it. So I purposely tried to make these play times accurate. So the first one I completed in 18 minutes, and I will say that I am a completionist. So I will read everything there is to read. I will try to do everything that I can see to do. So as a completionist, I completed the first one in 18 minutes. I completed the second one in 38 minutes, which is quite a bit of an increase. And I completed the third one I completed the second one in 25 minutes, and I completed the third one in 38 minutes. So It seems like they increase in length as you go, at least to me.
Yes, they do. And Tika in the chat also says 30, 40, and 45 minutes. And I think mine also started at, I think the first one was 35, maybe 40 minutes. And then it increased into, I think the last one took me an hour or so. So yeah, they do get longer and they get more intricate. And I say the story also gets better and better as you move on into it. So I think he's doing this the right way. The first one just gives you a little taste. And then the second one, it sort of expands it. And the third one, all of a sudden, it twists the tables on you. And hopefully number 4 will be the grand fucking finale we all deserve.
And I do love the fact that the third one kind of has a callback to the first one. Or the second one? I don't remember. The battery thing, right?
Oh, that's the third one, yeah.
Yeah, the third one, you have to do something different with the battery than you did in the first or second one.
Yes, because suddenly you can go behind the view screen and you have to replace a battery.
Right.
And as the player, you already know that there's a battery in the crawl space. Where you can type "get in the fucking hole" and he actually does.
I actually just typed "enter hole" the first time. Maybe that's the kind of guy I am.
Yeah. Well, then again, I was recording it, so comedy first and all that. But shit, we should probably mention that Phil Fortier is actually doing these Snail Trek games. It's not really his primary project either.
Yeah.
Because he's working on a game called Cascade Quest, which Snail Trek
which I'm looking forward to, definitely looking forward to. Yes.
Snail Trek is kind of a litmus test, and so was Void Quest for Adventure Jam for how people would receive this parser interface. And it was met with, at least from my point of view, like triumphant jubilation that he'd managed to make parser games fun again. but
Although,
they really sort of function as like PR for his upcoming full-length game, which is not
so
gonna be episodic.
here's another thing to talk about, though. Here's another thing to talk about. His audience thus far, I think, are basically us. People who are really already huge, like, fanatical adventure game fans. Do you think that he will ever reach beyond that with this kind of endeavor?
I suppose naively, I hope that people will not see parser games as anachronistic anymore, that there is freedom to be found by typing in what you want the protagonist to do instead of relying on mouse cursors, icons, predefined actions, the freedom to actually define your own actions, and then of course the burden being on the writer to actually foresee what kind of actions the player might take. I think the naive optimist in me hopes that by doing these kind of games, maybe one day he'll go beyond, because he's catering to a niche crowd. I will completely agree with that. He's got scan lines and EGA palettes and all of this shit. But maybe one day we'll see like a I don't know, fucking 4K 3D rendered game that has a parser in it, and it doesn't. Well, that's a good old swig there. That has a parser in it, because it's not just okay, that's what Granddad used to do when he played games, but no, that's actually how games can be
tea,
played.
by the way.
Oh, okay. I thought that was the whiskey bottle. Just...
No, this is the whiskey. I'm sipping this.
All right.
This is tea.
All right. I'll buy that. So anyway, yeah, that's the. I mean, I know that's probably not what's going to happen. What he is doing, and very consciously so, again with the EGA palette and scan lines, is catered to people like us. But even to people who are playing, let's say, Wadget Eye games and are finding enjoyment in a genre that has been pronounced dead time and time again, and now clearly is not, they might even go back and say, okay, well, maybe Granddad was onto something. Maybe there is fun to be had in playing, parser games. Hopefully.
Yeah, and I mean, and since this channel is not dedicated particularly to adventure games, but rather indie games in general, I think maybe it might be a good opportunity right now to talk about what adventure games are doing, because we might not talk about that for some time. I think adventure games like Phil's games, like other people's games, like Charlotte's games,
Charlotte.
Yeah.
Gotta love.
I mean, there is a resurgence. Hopefully, my upcoming game, but I don't know. But there is a resurgence right now in indie development of adventure games, of games that are narrative focused, and yet, as Roberta Williams would put it, focused on the intellectual as well.
I mean, we've seen over the past couple of decades, adventure game elements slowly creep into genres that were not previously known for having them. I mean, as far back as, I think one of the earliest examples was Strife, the 3D shooter, really had dialogue trees. Modern games like Fallout 4 had dialogue trees as well, and basic puzzle solving and all of this shit.
Well, that's only because, like, adventure games, if I may be so bold, adventure games made PC gaming cool. Like, adventure games, before adventure games, there were roguelikes, right? In the 70s, there were roguelikes. And then suddenly, fucking Roberta Williams invented graphical adventure games. Well, I mean, there were text adventure games before that. There was Zork, right? There was the Colossal Cave Adventure. there were text adventure games before that, but suddenly Roberta Williams invented this idea of graphics and text telling a story and being an intellectual pursuit at the same time. And that lasted for 2 decades, a decade and a half. And of course that informed all of the games after that. The shooter games that came after it. So, I mean, the shooter games in the 90s were just shooter games. You just shot shit.
Mm-hmm.
But you had to evolve from that. And those clearly took their inspiration from adventure games. Every game took its inspiration from adventure games because adventure games were the games in the 90s.
Oh, sure.
For sure.
They were what you would consider the AAA titles of the 90s.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think you're right. There is a resurgence in adventure games. It's still a niche genre, to be sure, but it is what I think modern adventure games do very well is that they build upon and learn from, well, cynically speaking, the mistakes of the past. We no longer have Walking Dead situations. We no longer have unfair deaths, at least. I haven't seen them in quite a while.
Yeah.
And we have some games that go, we've invented the walking simulator, which gets a lot of derision, but I actually love the shit out of that genre because if you're gonna tell me a story, you don't have to shove in puzzles just to call it a game. I'm perfectly willing to just wander through a world and explore it. As my friend Ben Chandler is fond of saying, exploration is gameplay.
The only problem that I have with some walking simulators is that they don't have enough exploration. Is that they're too linear. I like a good walking simulator where you can actually walk where you want to walk and experience different things no matter where you go.
Yes, I completely agree. The beginner's guide is too linear, but a game like Gone Home...
The beginner's guide is what I was going to mention, yeah. The beginner's guide, no, it's not a good game. But his first game, The Stanley Principle, was the Stanley Parable. The Stanley Parable, fucking amazing game.
Yes.
It had almost no gameplay. You just walk different directions. But amazing game. Beautifully designed game.
Yes.
And then Beginner's Guide, I sucked. I'm sorry, but yeah, sucked.
Intriguing story, but way too linear. What I liked about Gone Home, and believe me, I will fillet Gone Home until the cows come home. But Gone Home did a very brilliant thing where, again, it kind of did the Lisa Suit Larry 6 and 7 thing, where the entire world seemed open to you from the start. It was nudging you in the direction it wanted to go. It was, when you look under the hood, a linear story. But it didn't feel like it when you were playing it. You felt like you were continually uncovering new shit by, going to rooms you'd already been in, but suddenly you could unlock this shit and all that junk. So
I know you're a Telltale hater, but actually I'm a Telltale fan. And actually that's what I like about Telltale games. They are completely linear, but they give you a very, very well-crafted illusion of choice. If you replay them, don't do that. Because it's going to break the entire illusion. Because then you'll realize that you really had no choice, and then every single choice that you made was meaningless. But when you play it the first time, you will seriously think that you're making choices.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I love about Telltale games.
All right, I will give them that. That is awesome, and that is another thing that I wish more modern games would do. Not necessarily in the Telltale style, but make it so that variables in the game actually affect further outcomes. Go back to games like, let's say, the Blade Runner game that Westwood did, which was a very short game, and let's be honest, had a few glaring problems. But one of the things it did brilliantly, I thought, was that it secretly kept score in the background. Depending on how you treated NPCs in the game, it would decide whether or not the NPCs were replicants, or if you, the protagonist, was actually a replicant. It would make some decisions just on the outset through a random number generator, but it would also take into account how you treated NPCs. The Pandora Directive did the same thing. If you're an asshole to people, you're going to get the asshole ending. If you're being nice to people, you would get the nice ending. That kind of thing. That's another thing that interactive medium can do that linear medium can't. And I think more modern adventure games should embrace that. Give us multiple objectives to solve at our own pace. Give us branching paths, or at least give us the quote-unquote illusion of choice. Make it seem like what we're doing has an impact.
Yep. And I mean, and that brings in the fact I have a game idea in which it's a multiplayer adventure game in which all you do is choose dialogue options, but the other characters are real players and they're choosing options as well, and you're all not competing necessarily, but you all have different goals, and so the story is progressing the same way, but one character might achieve his goals while another doesn't, depending on how you interact with each other. So I think there's a future for those kinds of games as well. But
yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you should bring up a multiplayer adventure game. This is a nut that I've tried to crack with some of my adventure game friends to see, because Lisa Larry creator
I'd be happy to work with you with it.
I wouldn't know the first thing about coding it.
I would. I've been a programmer for 25 years, so we can work with it together if you want.
There's an idea. Al Lowe actually had an idea. One of the reasons why there isn't a Leisure Suit Larry 4 is because he wanted Leisure Suit Larry 4 to be a multiplayer adventure game, and he was trying to crack that nut with 28.8 baud modems and all of that shit. But it's we've batted ideas back and forth on the Backseat Designers Facebook group. A couple of trying to work out how a multiplayer adventure game could work. I think maybe we ought to bring you on the Backseat Designers podcast and talk about multiplayer adventure games. Can they be done? Can they not be done? There's an idea. We might want to reciprocate on the other end there. So anyway, I'm sorry to say this, but we've been chatting now for a good 2 hours. I'm gonna have to get going soon.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much done, unless anybody else has anything to say. We have talked about Snail Trek.
That was a good discussion for the very first Indie Fireside. You guys should be proud. Vance for leading it, and Trolls for coming for being the first brave guest to come on. And
did I make any sense? Because I'm beyond fucking tired at this point. It's almost 6 a.m. now.
Man, thank you. Well, especially thank you for staying up so late, man. Also, hi Rockfish 100. Thanks for joining the chat. We're almost done though. But we will.
Why don't you thank me for waking up so early? Damn it!
I forgot you're in Korea.
Whiskey you'll be fine. At such an early hour.
Thank you for morning drinking, Vance. Thank you. So
thank you guys so much for having me on, Vance. It was so great to talk to you. We should do this some more. And Josh, thank you for being the awesome, quiet host that you've been. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. And just for everyone, before we sign off, you can follow Vance at Standing Off Game Dev, and of course Trolls at SQ Historian, Space Quest Historian. He goes by online, and
and please do follow him. It is well worth your while.
And just so you know, on this particular live channel, those of you watching live or want to watch live, every Wednesday evening we have our Indie Game Riot podcast, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and then this Indie Fireside will happen every month. So at the beginning of February, we're going to be announcing the next game under $10. Everyone can buy it. We also try and get a hold of some codes for people that can't necessarily afford it. You just contact us and let us know, and we'll try and help you out. And then the next actual discussion, like what we're doing now, will happen the last Friday of February. So keep an eye out for that. It's all on Discord, which if you want to join the Discord and you haven't already, the button is below the stream or linked in the video if you're watching the recorded version of this.
I just remembered something I forgot to say. I actually wrote Phil before this episode.
Oh,
and asked him-
your secret!
Yeah, well,
Yes!
Oh
I
yeah,
know
yeah,
a
you-
secret.
yeah.
I just remembered. I've had
Snail
the
Trek
window
secret.
open throughout the chat, and I haven't looked at it once. I asked Phil to tell me a secret that no one else knows, so you guys would have a bit of an exclusive. On
Yes.
The show, 'cause
Okay.
Indie
Let's
Fireside
do it.
exclusive.
Sadly. All right. The secret is that Phil's nephew, his 14-year-old nephew, is actually responsible for one of the races in the encyclopedia in the Zox computer. It was the Fungashians or something. That's actually not his. That's his 14-year-old nephew who
Nice.
had a race that he invented put into the game. So it's a sweet little
Awesome.
secret. It's not terribly earth-shattering or anything.
Well,
but
we
now you know.
we are the ones that broke that particular Easter egg.
Yes. And
Thanks to
we
you.
actually talked about earlier how much the world building plays into the enjoyment of the game. So there you go. That is quite an achievement by his nephew, playing into what I consider to be one of the best aspects of the game, that kind of world building. So
Yeah, buddy.
Awesome.
All right, well, we're gonna head off so you can continue getting drunk, Vance, and Trolls can get to sleep. And actually, I'll
you're
probably
getting drunk at
get to sleep
2
soon too.
p.m. Okay.
Because it's midnight for me. So, anyway, thank you all for so much in the live chat for coming to the very first Indie Fireside. We hope to see you next month or maybe next week. Actually, next week we're not doing a podcast because Eric is not able to show up. But the week after that, we'll be doing the podcast. So hopefully you'll all show up to that. And have a good night, everyone.
Yep. Take care, and thank you for joining us.
See you around the Chrono Stream.